The 2023 Pro Farmer Crop Tour is presented by Pioneer. Pioneer combines cutting-edge research with one of the largest local testing programs in the industry to help farmers succeed. Pioneer, what's next happens here. And by BASF, helping you do the biggest job on earth. The international sponsor for Crop Tour is the U.S. Soybean Export Council. Crop Tour 2023 is also supported by Ag Leader, by Brandt, by Champion Seed, by Farm Credit Services of America, by Growmark, by Meristem Crop Performance, by the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, by Nutrien, by Pattern Ag, by RCIS, and by the United Soybean Board.
Hello and welcome once again to Crop Tour Live. I'm Clinton Griffiths. We're happy you're joining us tonight for day 2 of the Pro Farmer Crop Tour. Now the western leg of the tour focused today on Nebraska, going from Grand Island to Nebraska City. While in the east, we started the day in Noblesville, Indiana, ending tonight in Bloomington, Illinois. And scouts and others checking out the tour, awaiting the results, gathered together tonight in Nebraska City and in Bloomington, waiting to see the average yield predictions for both corn and soybeans in 2019. So 2019 is the last. And those numbers coming up shortly. Joining us once again tonight are tour leaders in the east, Pro Farmer editor Brian Grady, and in the west, the host of AgriTalk, Chip Flory. Guys, give me 20 seconds, real quick, what you saw today. Brian, what did you see today on your leg of the tour? Brian, give me 20 seconds. What did you see on the tour today?
Well, in Indiana, Clinton, 180.89 bushels per acre was the average out of Indiana, up 1.7%. And on soybeans, we had 1309.96, up 12.3% there. So, heavily potted soybean crop in Indiana. And the corn crop it was good, but it wasn't as great as what we potentially thought it might be.
All right, and Chip, we're just minutes away here, seconds away from getting to those numbers out there in the western leg of the tour. Give me just a couple of things that you saw in Nebraska.
Highly variable. One of the most variable Nebraska corn crops that I've ever seen.
All right, let's bring those numbers up. Brian, we'll start once again with you there. I think you ran through them real quick, but give us those numbers, the graphics up on the screen now so folks can see it.
Yeah, 180.89 was the corn yield, up 1.7% there, and it was also, it was down 1.5% from the 3-year average. So, decent but not great. And then on soybeans, 1309.96, up 12.3% from last year, and also up from the 3-year average.
Kind of a big crop there in Indiana. Chip, give us Nebraska real quick. We've got these graphics for you.
All right, 167.22 bushels per acre for the calculated yield in Nebraska. That's on 385 samples, up 5.5% from a year ago, down 2.8% from the 3-year average. The increase from a year ago was split between the ear count, up 3.6%, and the grain length, up 2.7%. So it's a nice recovery in that corn crop from a year ago. Then on soybeans, 1160.02, up 9.1% from a year ago on the pods in a 3x3 foot square.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick on that though. It's a nice pod count in Nebraska, but boy, we were in several soybean fields on all 10 routes today that are right on the edge of giving it up for the year. It needs to rain tonight, and it doesn't look like it's coming.
Yeah, and I think that's the question, right? So if we take a couple minutes here to kind of talk back and forth, Chip, let's stay in Nebraska for just a minute. When we talk about Nebraska, that's the thing about that. I mean, it's a recovery from last year a bit, but boy, we still have a lot of stress out there, and especially this week.
And I think it's over a wider area than what it was a year ago. We actually had a drier. When we do our soybean observations, we rate the soil moisture, and it's just an observation.
Sure.
But we actually came back drier this year than what we were a year ago and on the 3-year average. Number one, I think it's because we pulled several more samples than what we did a year ago. Number two, I think it's because the dry areas are over a wider area, over more of the tour area than what we hit a year ago. And down in the south central part of Nebraska, boy, it's every bit as dry as what it was a year ago up in northeast Nebraska.
Well, let's talk, Brian, let's talk a little bit about that Indiana crop because, boy, we hear some pretty big things and some big expectations for the Indiana crop. Do you think we get to some of these kind of big numbers that are out there in the forecast?
Well, USDA put a record yield of 195 on it as of August 1, and based on what we found, I think that it probably has gone backwards since the beginning of August, the last 3 weeks. There's a lot of variability out there, so keep in mind that it's hard to measure in years with the extreme variability within the fields, and so we'll see where it all ends up. Crop maturity was better today than what we saw in Ohio, but it's still lagging in some of these fields, and so it's still got to go some. Obviously, the heat will be coming through here the next couple days, and that's going to have an impact. I think the big key for Indiana and for Ohio, for that matter, is what happens the weeks after that, the weather after the heat wave goes through. Do they get rain? Does it remain hot for an extended period of time? That will be critical to how these crops finish in the Eastern Belt.
Chip, what do you want to know about the Eastern Belt? You got Brian right here.
Oh boy, maturity. That's one of the things that I'm always curious about when it comes to the Eastern Corn Belt. Is there time for that corn crop to add some additional weight?
Yeah, I think there is. Like I said, if the weather's okay and favorable. The big concern, or the concern with maturity, probably isn't as great in the Eastern Corn Belt as what it is in the Western Corn Belt. A bit more time just based on geographically how they're situated below the Great Lakes and stuff like that. So first freeze and frost dates and those types of things aren't as big an issue. It doesn't mean that they're fully removed, but it means that they're probably not as great as what they are for the Western Corn Belt.
Yeah, Brian, go ahead, Chip. Go ahead.
On the maturity side of the corn crop out here, we had the discussion just a little bit ago here in Nebraska City with the folks, and I made the comment and I said I don't mean to sound like the growing season is completely done and ramped up, but on a lot of the dryland corn that we saw, I don't think a rain is going to do a whole lot to help it. The ears are hanging on the outside of the row, and I was in soybeans all day, but there was general agreement from the scouts that the ears were hanging even worse once you get past the end rows and into the main part of the field. So pretty tough situation out there, and if the ears are hanging on those dryland crops, it's pretty much done.
Brian, real quick, anything you want to know about the Western leg before we show a little bit more about what folks were seeing today?
Well, I'll be honest with you. When I hear that ears are hanging already in Nebraska, that's a stark contrast to what we're seeing out here in the Eastern Belt. So, it's kind of the tale of two crops at this point in time, it seems like to me. But I was really, Chip already addressed it, but I was really shocked at the soil moisture rating. And last year in Nebraska, it surprised me when I saw that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, we're going to look at some soil moisture here. You know, that heat today, a big concern on the tour, not just for scouts, but also for the crops, as you've mentioned. And we haven't seen the end of it. Now, take a look at this map from the National Weather Service. You can check out the maximum daytime high temperatures for today. Temperatures in Nebraska up into the triple digits. Indiana appearing to be a cooler spot today, only in the 90s. But the situation no better tomorrow as those temperatures in Illinois and Iowa, many places remain above 100. Did it feel like 100 today, Chip?
Yes, it did. We only saw triple digits briefly on the thermometer, but 96 degrees and a feels like temperature of a 108 when we pulled into town.
Well, you know, this high heat added on top of those areas dealing with the drought and dryness, and may not add to crops as we head toward harvest season, as you both have alluded to. Now, you're traveling here with scouts today in the West. They say there's really no doubt the crop is better than last year in Nebraska, but spotty with areas of drought, and the heat could cut into those yields as we get toward harvest. Many farmers report using near record amounts of irrigation water, and they don't think they're done yet here.
I think corn, the damage probably been done. I think, you know, we're at the week of August, so I think what we're counting for the corn crop is probably, if we get a 150 yield, I'm guessing it's probably going to be close to that. The soybeans, a little different story. You know, August is when you make your soybean crop. Obviously, the whole corn belt's been dry in August. We've been hot in August. My concern is them last clusters that we added here 3 weeks ago. I'm afraid we're going to lose some of those clusters. The beans aren't going to fill out. So I think the heat's probably going to affect the beans more than the corn.
You know, it just released today, guys. Take a look at this. A new root zone moisture map. That's a moisture in the top 3 feet of soil. You can clearly see what has farmers concerned there in Nebraska. Also, Iowa, Minnesota, forcing them to put a lot of water on crops there. Those areas shaded in red where there isn't a lot of moisture below the top meter of soil. Brian, as we talk about Indiana, how did the moisture situation seem there? Because I know it was dry to start the year.
In most cases, it was okay. You know, we had a couple areas where it was dry, some of the sandier soils and stuff like that that just don't have the holding capacity. But for the most part, I thought that soil moisture was good in Ohio, pretty decent in Indiana, kind of like the map reflected there.
Yeah, now in its latest farmer survey, USDA calling for record corn yields there in Indiana, 195 bushels to the acre. Of course, not everyone we spoke with seemed convinced that that would happen today.
Well, a little bit disappointing on the corn side relative to what the hype was when we came out here on this route anyway. On the first 4 samples, it hasn't really blown me away. It's nice that they have some moisture and that will blunt the blow somewhat. But depending on how hot and how long the duration is, it probably isn't going to do anything positive at this point.
There's a lot of these beans that, because of our recent rains, have got some pods in the top that could still come on and develop, but the heat could really have an impact and take those out.
One of the interesting things Schrader had to say was, you know, one of the issues that they're seeing right now with this corn crop is some instance of tar spot. Brian, did you see much of that on your route today?
We didn't in my particular route, but some of the scouts did note it in tonight's meeting. And so, yeah, it's out there. The Pioneer agronomist tonight talked about it in his presentation to the group. And so, yeah, it's a factor. It's just a matter of how widespread it is and how damaging it is when all's said and done.
All right, Brian, give me your big takeaway from this leg of the tour, day 2. What are you walking away with?
Well, so the Ohio corn yield came back bigger than the Indiana corn yield, and I think that that's a shocker to me, to be honest with you. You just anticipate that Indiana's probably always going to out-yield Ohio, and that may be the case, but the tour data that we pulled showed that the Ohio corn crop is better than Indiana's corn crop, and so that's a surprise to me. A lot of soybean pods out here in the Eastern Corn Belt. Now we need the moisture and the time to fill those out. But boy, they have a lot of yield factory, as we call it, with all those pods out here.
And Chip, what about for you? What's your big takeaway after day 2, spending so much of your day there in Nebraska?
Okay, there are a couple of things that Brian and I do when we are checking data to make sure that everything makes sense. And we've got this differential check that we do. And as we were looking at the differential check on Nebraska, we realized that there are some that are outside of the limits that we normally are willing to accept.
Yeah.
Until you consider that in each of those districts, we probably had a 25 yield and a 280 yield. So when you get those kinds of variables happening within the districts, there's hit and miss. We pulled 385 samples. We should smooth the variability so that we've got a good idea of what's going on in Nebraska. And by the way, our irrigated versus dry land sampling count in Nebraska was right just a touch under 50%, right where we were a year ago.
All right. We're at the halfway point here on the tour. As you guys work your way into Illinois and Iowa, any big expectations for what you're going to see there? I mean, USDA's got those crops still pretty big, but we know if you look at that root zone moisture, how dry it can be.
Yeah, the two biggest producing states, so they matter, and they matter a lot. And so the next 2 days are going to be critical in terms of what we find. With Chip's crew in western Iowa tomorrow, my crew in Illinois going into eastern Iowa, and then finishing up with eastern Iowa on Thursday. And so those two biggest states are very critical in terms of where we end up as a U.S. corn crop and soybean crop, in my opinion.
Chip, as you start to talk about day 3, what are you thinking?
Day 3, I'm thinking that we're going to see good crops in western Iowa. I really do. I think we're going to see a bean crop that is in good shape. I think we're going to see a bean crop that is relatively weed-free. I think we're going to see a corn crop that's got some really good yield potential. But I'm telling you, day 4 is what I've got on my radar, because I can't wait until Brian's crew gets north of Cedar Rapids and makes their way up to the border, because those 2 red dots that you showed on that moisture map, Clinton, there's not a lot of people that realize how dry it is up there in northeast Iowa.
Yeah, we expect that to be pretty telling as the crop tour works its way north into day 4. But day 3, the Pro Farmer Crop Tour, coming up next. Tomorrow, scouts in the east will travel from Bloomington, Illinois into Iowa City, Iowa. And then out in the west, the tour heads out tomorrow morning from Nebraska City en route to Spencer, Iowa. So lots of ground yet to cover. And you want to make sure that you join us back here again tomorrow night for the results from day 3 of the tour at 8 o'clock Central Time. All right, Chip, Brian, we're going to send you back. Thanks to everybody for watching.
The 2023 Pro Farmer Crop Tour is presented by Pioneer. Pioneer combines cutting-edge research with one of the largest local testing programs in the industry to help farmers succeed. Pioneer, what's next happens here. And by BASF, helping you do the biggest job on earth. The international sponsor for Crop Tour is the U.S. Soybean Export Council. Crop Tour 2023 is also supported by Ag Leader, by Brandt, by Champion Seed, by Farm Credit Services of America, by Growmark, by Meristem Crop Performance, by the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, by Nutrien, by Pattern Ag, by RCIS, and by the United Soybean Board.